This is a book whose verses give clear instructions, explained by a wise and knowledgeable Lord. The Quran claims to be clear, decisive, and perfectly constructed. But the true Quran is in Arabic, so how can we know? Far from being a problem, we can use translations to test the Quran's claim. If the Quran is really clear and decisive, then devoted Muslims who translate the Quran into English should give us equivalent translations. Not identical words, of course, but the same idea. But if different translators describe different ideas, then the meaning of the Quran can't be clear. We already saw this problem in Quran 434, where some translations said to beat rebellious wives, while others softened it to separate from them. So if the Quran were so clear, we wouldn't be left guessing.
First of all, this is a straw man, and I pointed to this fact to testify when he tried to bring this point a couple months ago live. So it's disingenuous that he keeps repeating this point even though he got absolutely destroyed.
Not that my book isn't saying this is a clear book that explains all things. So your book holds itself to a higher standard than my own.
That's a complete misinterpretation of the text. You really think the Quran means it can explain everything? That's.
I don't mean like a literal everything, but I think that it's saying that it's perspicuous. It's saying that it's very perspicuous.
Right. Have you read chapter 3, verse 7 of the Quran? Have you read when it says that there's unclear verses and there's clear verses in the book?
Okay, that's fair enough. That's
right. So
secondly, if this is what the Quran truly meant by these verses, then why do our earliest tafsirs of this verse tell us the Quran is clear only on stuff specifically like prohibitions and the afterlife? If the intended meaning of the text is that the Quran is clear on every verse, with no exception, then we should find early commentators who had this view. However, this view isn't shared by any classical commentator. Also, the funniest part of all, the same verse Testify quoted uses the disconnected letters in the Quran, the letters that no one believes has clear meanings, but are part of the unclear verses mentioned in Quran chapter 3 verse 7. So it is so uncharitable to think the Quran gives us the most unclear expression to then follow it up by saying that every verse in the Quran is clear.
Now, let's put Quran 65:4 under the same test. Let's start with the clear Quran translation. As for your women past the age of menstruation, in case you do not know, their waiting period is 3 months, and those who have not menstruated as well. As for those who are pregnant, their waiting period ends with delivery. This plainly includes those who have not yet menstruated, meaning prepubescent girls.
Firstly, this statement highlights your ignorance of Islamic fiqh. Not a single Islamic scholar says that the only condition of puberty is menstruation. Rather, they say that menstruation is only one of the potential conditions.
الشاهد أن يقول قوله تعالى واللائي لم يحض كما قال واللائي يئسن من المحيض من نسائكم إن ارتبتم وعدتهن 3 أشهر واللائي لم يحض يعني اللائي لم يحضن عدتهن 3 أشهر. ما يظهر لنا أنها تختص بمن لا تحيض، فإنه يمكن تبلغ بتمام 15 سنة بالإنبات بالإنزال كما هو معروف.
As is, for example, having nocturnal emissions, etc. Evidence for this correct definition of puberty within Islam can be found in the classical book of Hanafi fiqh known as Al-Mukhtasar by Imam al-Quduri, who was born in 362 after Hijri. Furthermore, scholars such as Sheikh Salih al-Fawzan in his Summary of Islamic Fiqh and also the classical book of the Hanafi madhab known as Al-Hidayah, when they both interpret 65:4 and they're talking about the conditions of iddah, they say that the part of this verse وَلَا إِلَمْ يَحِدْنَا refers to the woman who has obtained puberty but lacks menstruation.
It's very arbitrary to say that menstruation is the only physical indicator to then signify that a woman is a woman. As we can see from this depiction, it's quite arbitrary, as a girl back then that's considered to be 12 years and 1 day old prior to menstruation and 12 years and 2 days old after menstruation, you will see no physical difference really other than the fact that she's bled now. When a woman starts to have desires and is physically developed enough to endure intercourse, that's when she's physically ready to have relations. And as we know, mental maturity is another factor, and we'll get to that at the end of the video. Also, we have to address the misconception that a girl prior to menstruation has like 0 physical developments. Actually, a girl menstruates in the second last stage of puberty. There are 5 Tanner stages of puberty, and menstruation comes at around Tanner stage 4. So a girl that is about to menstruate or is about to reach the age of menstruation, however, still hasn't, but has other physical developments such as breast development, height, growth, etc. This is what this Quran verse is referring to.
So what do the translations say? At IslamAwakened.com, I analyzed over 40 English translations of Quran 65:4. The results, Not every translator was comfortable with what the Arabic actually seems to say. 2/3 bite the bullet. They explicitly state that this verse applies to prepubescent girls. These translations say things like, those who have not yet menstruated, those who have not yet had their courses, those who have not yet had menses. Roughly a quarter of the translations soften the meaning, introducing ambiguity by implying that these women might have a medical condition or some other vague reason for not menstruating. This approach appears both in older and newer translations. Like Pickthall says, along those who have it not. Yusuf Ali, for those who have no courses, it is the same. Muhammad Assad, as well as for such as do not have any courses. Ali Unal, or for those who for some reason do not have monthly periods. Shabir Ahmed, as well as those women who do not have menstruation, and in brackets, for any physiological reason. Anything in brackets has been added by the translator that doesn't go back to the original Arabic. These versions obscure the age factor, making it easier for apologists to argue that this is about medical issues rather than child marriage. The remaining 8% erase or rewrite the meaning entirely, completely removing any mention of prepubescent girls. This trend only appears in the late 20th and 21st century. Rashid Khalifa was the first to radically change the meaning. He merged the category with pregnancy, making it sound as if the only ones affected are those who are expecting a child. Dr. Kamal Omar rewrites the verse to say, those who did not menstruate, adding in brackets, due to some abnormality or disease in spite of being fully mature. The monotheist group reinterprets the verse to only apply to menopausal or pregnant women, removing any reference to minors. So while some older translations soften the wording, outright deletion or reinterpretation only emerged in the late 20th and 21st century.
Yeah, so it's quite simple. Just because modern liberal people want to reinterpret the Quran, it doesn't then mean the Quran is unclear. We see many examples of this where people reinterpret verses of the Quran that are clearly about certain things because they have their own presuppositions they're reading into the text.
When we turn to the early tafsir, When we turn to the early tafsir, and me, as a kuffar here, is no room for ambiguity. This verse explicitly permits marriage and divorce for prepubescent girls. The classical scholars admitted this without hesitation long before modern translators started trying to cover it up. For example, Ibn Kathir says, Allah clarifies the waiting period for a woman in menopause. The same for the young, for those who have not reached the age of menstruation. Their waiting period is 3 months, like those in menopause. Tasfir al-Jalalain, as for those of your women who no longer expect to menstruate, if you have any doubts, their waiting period shall be 3 months, and also for those who have not yet menstruated because of their young age. Ibn Abbas, O Messenger of Allah, what about the waiting period of those who do not have menstruation because they are too young? He replied, their waiting period is 3 months. There's no ambiguity here. The classical scholars unanimously interpreted this verse as allowing marriage and divorce for prepubescent girls.
This point stems from a misunderstanding of the word saghira, and therefore presuming that it necessarily means prepubescent. This, however, is baseless and contradicts many evidences. For example, when Abu Bakr and Umar ibn Khattab, they came to ask for Fatima radiyallahu anha's hand in marriage. However, the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam turned them away because she was young, saghira. When commenting on this, the 16th century scholar Al-Qari mentioned that although he rejected their proposal, he accepted Ali marrying her as he was more of a suitable age for her. This is evidence that the term saghira is relative. Another evidence showing that this term does not necessarily refer to prepubescent individuals is that when the Prophet ﷺ said in the famous hadith, يُسَلِّمُ الصَّغِيرُ عَلَى الْكَبِيرِ, which means that the young should initiate salam to the elders. No one would be stupid enough to suggest that the Prophet ﷺ is only given advice here to prepubescent children. Additionally, the Quran uses the words here, min nisaikum, which means from your woman. Okay, now the word nisa, which means woman, only ever refers to adult females. Okay, and this is something which linguists such as Imam al-Razi have also picked up. Okay, and they also share this understanding.
Other points we can add to this as well, the fact that Quran chapter 4 verse 6, Muqatil bin Sulaiman, our earliest tafsir, says that a marriageable age here refers to when a girl is able to decipher between what's right and wrong, which is at around the age of puberty. So we now have this as part of the principle of what goes into the conditions for marriage from the Quran itself. That mental maturity has a role to play. Also, the Quran mentions the concept of the fitrah that the scholars then expand upon. And the fitrah has to do with the natural disposition that Allah has created every human being with. And as we know, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala does not contradict that. So if He was to legislate against the fitrah, then that would be an impossibility. An example of this is if Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala legislated for homosexuality to be okay. This would be seen as contradicting the fitrah, as every human being has this natural disgust towards homosexuality. However, obviously there are exceptions to that rule in the generality of history. But even today, people still have these innate disgusts towards homosexuality, incest, and bestiality and so on. Now, what we could put as part of this category of sexual immoralities that contradicts the fitrah is being attracted to someone that has prepubescent qualities and hasn't physically matured on any level. So now we know it is an impossibility for Quran chapter 65 verse 4 to include someone that's not mentally mature nor someone that has any pubescent features. As we know, pedophilia, the attraction towards someone that is prepubescent, totally is a deviance from the general sexual inclinations of humankind.
So, is the Quran clear and decisive? There are three possibilities here. Option 1. The Quran isn't clear. Over a third of translations soften or erase the meaning. If the Quran were truly clear, this wouldn't happen. If Muslims themselves can't agree, then its claim to be clear and decisive is false. Option 2. The Quran is clear. It does allow for child marriage. Early tafsir, classical scholars, and older translations all confirm this. But if that's true, modern translators are deliberately altering the Quran to fit modern sensibilities. If they're willing to rewrite their own scripture, why should we trust any English translation of the Quran? Option 3. The Quran is clear, but it's only about rare medical cases or not about child marriage at all. But if that's true, why did so many pre-21st century translators and scholars agree that it refers to child marriage? And side note, Quran 4:6 doesn't help. Saying guardians should test orphans for sound judgment before handing over their property doesn't override the fact that Quran 65:4 treats child marriage as a given.
No, so chapter 4 verse 6 actually helps us a lot, as well as with the classical understanding that you're trying to rely upon that tells us that the marriageable age here it's referring to is the age of puberty, you absolute jahil.
And me, as a kufar here,
Inshallah, on my Discord server at the end of this month, Brother Omar will be giving a presentation on this topic. He is the brother that collabed for this video. Check him out in the link in the description. I will be linking his YouTube channel. But inshallah, if you want to join that lesson at the end of the month, where he's going to be giving a PowerPoint presentation and a detailed explanation of 65:4 and just young marriages generally, then be sure to subscribe to my Patreon down below. But for the rest of this video, inshallah, I'll be playing a clip of me detailing early Christians and Jews who accepted young marriages in the pre-modern age.
Commentator Origen of Alexandria was only condemned for heresy a couple centuries later for something that has nothing to do with this topic. And up until his call for heresy, he was highly regarded amongst people in the early church. He says on Ezekiel 16 verse 8, "And I came to you and I saw you, and behold, it was your time and the time of lodgers." What is the meaning of the phrase your time? It indicates the time of adolescence. Now, the context of Ezekiel is that Jerusalem is being presented in a metaphor as a woman that's growing up and maturing. Her time here is her time for marriage, by which she reaches the onset of puberty according to the earliest Christian exegetes of this passage. And Origen will just be reflecting the ideas and beliefs of those around them at his time. From the Mishnah, where you can see on the screen right now, there is disagreement on what age this is referring to when a girl's breasts are formed and her hair grows. Some say this is the age of 9 years, some say 11, some say 12. But the general principle by which a girl has to meet for her to meet the criteria of being ready for marriage is her breasts are formed and her pubic hair grew. See here in Thomas Aquinas' Summa, he says a girl can be ready for marriage at the age of 12 or even possibly earlier than that if she meets the conditions. We see Tertullian saying that veiling is only applicable to adults, and he says that that's usually at the age of 12. However, if puberty is attained prior to that, whereby the girl menstruates, she is to veil. I provided before Origen's commentary on Ezekiel 16. And also we have a historical overview here talking about how the minimum age of marriage in Christian societies extended to being the utmost minimum being 7. And finally, we have an early Christian source where a lot of Orthodox and Catholic traditions are derived from. What it says in that source is that Mary was married off to Joseph at the age of 12, while Joseph was a lot older. And the early church didn't mind accepting this.